Hello and welcome to the screencast. This is Hendershott-Kraetzer in the Department of Humanities at Olivet College, and welcome back to our talk on lines in poetry. In the first part of this presentation, we looked at length, rate, and weight with line. Now we're moving on into rhythm. You'll see that from this that rhythm has got a dark bullet all of its own. That's because rhythm is crazy complex. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means there's a lot that's going on with rhythm, and probably that's all we're actually going to cover in this particular screencast. So what is rhythm? Rhythm is the pattern and movement of language created by the choice of words and their arrangement. You can see movement is in scare quotes there because language doesn't move. It's just sitting there on the page. It moves when it's in the air, when it's being spoken, because it's traveling on sound waves. So it actually have a physical component when it's spoken, when it's oral language. But when it's in print, it's just there. It's not doing nothing. So whenever we talk about the rhythm, we're always talking in figures of speech. We're always using metaphor. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It's just that language is limited. The limitations of language prevent us from talking about things as they actually exist in the universe sometimes. Rhythm's a complex process, and it's affected by a number of things, including meter and stress patterns, the length of a line, where the line breaks, pauses within the lines, the use of white space in the lines, between stanzas, around the lines, diction, word choice, and sound combinations. There's a lot that goes on that affects rhythm, and that's one of the things that makes it so hard for so many people to talk about is the sheer complexity of the process, of the thing itself. One thing to remember when you're thinking about rhythm is that we, human beings, we're rhythmic creatures. We exist according to rhythm. We exist in rhythm and with rhythm because it's internal to us. It's part of us. And what do I mean by that? Well, just sit still for a second and listen to the sound of your heartbeat. It's regular. It's a pattern that we come to expect. We know our own heartbeats. We know the sound of the heartbeat from before we're born. We hear it inside our mother's wombs. It is a consistent feature of our universe. We know when we're not feeling well because our heartbeat becomes arrhythmic. We know when we're excited because it speeds up. We know when we are slowing down. It's just part of us. And so as human beings, we look for rhythm, we expect rhythm, and we find it comforting when we find it. And the poet who knows this, the poet who understands that human beings are rhythmic creatures, gains a greater power over his poetry, over her poetry, and a greater ability to achieve the effects that he or she wants with the poems that are being written. Crafty poets, poets who know their craft, use the knowledge that human beings are rhythmic to their advantage. So here's an example of a rhythmic poem. It's one that you're going to find very familiar. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll read a bit of it, just so you can get an idea of what's going on, and we'll talk a little bit about what you're hearing. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. This is a very rhythmic poem. This is one of the reasons people love this poem, aside from the nostalgia of it, besides the fact that you're used to it, that you're used to hearing it. It has very, very strong rhythms. You'll notice that I actually was adding pauses where they aren't actually indicated in the poem itself. It's arranged in highly rhythmic phrases. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. So it's obviously got rhyme going through it that helps, but it also has beats at certain points, at certain pulses, so that the whole thing hangs together. It's a very highly rhythmic piece of writing. I'm going to give you an example now of something that is not rhythmic that does pretty much the same thing. On Christmas Eve, throughout the house, not even a mouse was stirring. We carefully hung all the stockings by the chimney and hoped that Santa Claus would show up real soon. It says the same thing. It tells the same story, but oh my God, is that ugly. I mean, I deliberately wrote it, so it's just kind of choppy, hacked, not flowing, particularly pretty writing. The only thing that's flowing and pretty about it is the script, which, again, I picked deliberately. You can write rhythmically, and you can write arrhythmically. It's entirely within your control. It just depends on what you want to achieve with your writing. So you got to understand what creates rhythmic writing, what creates rhythmic reading, in order to achieve the effects that you want and avoid effects that you don't want. You do rhythm with reason. You do it for a purpose. Hear the sledges with the bells, silver bells. What a world of merriment their melody foretells, how they tinkle, tinkle, tinkle in the icy air of night, while the stars that oversprinkle all the heavens seem to twinkle with a crystalline delight, keeping time, time, time in a sort of runic rhyme to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells from the bells, 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 from the jingling and the tinkling of the bells. Poe is absolutely remarkable in all of his poetry, with sound and with rhythm. He understands sound and rhythm better than most poets you're going to want to find. If you look at these lines, if you remember from the last presentation, these lines are all over the map in terms of their length. There are some really, really long lines. What a world of merriment their melody foretells is a long line. I don't care how you define long, that's a long line. Versus silver bells and bells, bells, bells. Those are short lines, little 3-syllable lines, versus what a world of merriment their melody foretells. That's a 13, 14-syllable line. That's a big line. But he still manages to get a lot of rhythm in there, partly because of the sounds he's using, partly because he's got a very definite pattern of beats or stressed syllables coming out there. Got a lot of rhyming going on there, obviously. It would be hard, I think, to read this. I think it would be hard to read this without picking up on the rhythm of the thing. Maybe you'd have to go through it twice in order to just sound the words out and get used to using them. That's what I did. I mean, I practiced it before I did this screencast. But it fell pretty easily into a rhythm. There are poets who deliberately violate rhythmic patterns, again, for specific reasons. Here's an example of one. This is from T.S. Eliot's The Hollow Man. It's from the end of the poem. The poem basically is documenting what Eliot saw as a spiritual crisis, a loss of faith in the early 20th century. Between the idea and the reality, between the motion and the act, falls the shadow. For thine is the kingdom. Between the conception and the creation, between the emotion and the response, falls the shadow. Life is very long. Between the desire and the spasm, between the potency and the existence, between the essence and the descent, falls the shadow. For thine is the kingdom. For thine is, life is, for thine is the, this is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper. Eliot does both rhythmic writing in these stanzas and arrhythmic writing. The rhythmic writing is where he gets the repetitions. He's using anaphora, the repetition of phrases at the beginning of lines and refrain to create a sense of rhythm, of building. Between the, and the, between the, and the, falls the shadow. Between the, and the, between the, and the, falls the shadow. And again, he repeats that. Although there are shattered or fragmented aspects, for thine is the kingdom, I mean, it's obviously biblical language with highly rhythmic, but then, with highly rhythmic features, but then comes life is very long, which is not biblical language. And it's almost the opposite of the idea that's going on in the Lord's Prayer. And then the second to last stanza, you get completely shattered rhythms. For thine is, life is, for thine is the... I can't think of a way, just like with Poe's writing, that you would be... With Poe, I couldn't think of how you could read it not rhythmically, without picking up the rhythm. I can't think of really of a way that you would be able to read those three lines with any kind of rhythmic pattern, given the breaks and the kind of stuttery incompletion of them. This is very deliberate arrhythmias to enhance the sense that the world is falling apart, that even the fundamental aspect of Christianity, the Lord's Prayer, is being shattered, it's being busted up, that there's nothing left and everything's just fading out into ghostly, whimpery nothingness. When you're talking about rhythm, you got to talk about stresses. That's one of the most fundamental aspects of stresses. And unfortunately, people stress out about stresses. And you shouldn't, because it's really not that freaking hard. There are two types of syllables in the world. There are unstressed syllables, syllables that do not get any kind of vocal emphasis. And there are stressed syllables, syllables that do get vocal emphasis, so that's it. With stressed syllables, there are two different types. You have syllabic stresses, which are stresses that have to happen in certain words in order to pronounce a word correctly. If you've got a multi-syllable last name, there is a way in which you pronounce it. Kraetzer. Stress comes on the first syllable of my last name, not Kraetzer. It's a syllabic stress. That's what a syllabic stress is you have to put a stress there, an accent there, in order to say a word correctly. Banana, apple, reflexology, imbricate. Those are all syllabic stresses. Rhetorical stresses, on the other hand, are stresses that you can put on a one-syllable word, which normally does not get a stress, in order to create a sense of emphasis. So you have a syllabic stress where you got to put it to pronounce a word correctly, and a rhetorical stress where you must put a stress on a word in order to pronounce it correctly. And you just got an example of one there with must. I will not eat green eggs and ham. Those are all one-syllable words. You can put a stress anywhere you want. I'm putting them on every second syllable. But you can do that in another way. I will not eat green eggs and ham. That changes the rhythm of that line absolutely. I don't think it's a good rhythm for that line, but you can pronounce it like that. It's just a line I made up. Forget insipid cat and whisper. There's a bunch of ways in which you can say that, but if you look at it, there are certain things you have to say in order to say it correctly. Forget, insipid, whisper. You got to say those words that way in order to pronounce them correctly. But you can also throw a stress on cat because you want to emphasize that idea. So it's forget, insipid cat, and whisper. Some examples. What she remembers is his glistening back in the bath. And then a series of lines from Denise Levertov's Where is the Angel, which you've seen already. Unheard, I breathe. Such clear walls of curved glass. Not my thigh, but my throat. And the glass shatters and the iron sunders. In purple are syllabic stresses. They're syllables that must be pronounced with an emphasis in order to pronounce the word correctly. In red are rhetorical stresses. What she remembers is his glistening back in the bath. Unheard, I breathe. Such clear walls of curved glass. Not my thigh, but my throat. And the glass shatters and the iron sunders. You can read these lines differently by using rhetorical stresses differently. So you're going to freak out a little bit when you see this. Don't have a nutty on me. What I've done is kept the red and the purple coloring so you can see where they were, but I've added orange so you can see these different rhetorical stresses. What she remembers is his glistening back in the bath. Unheard, I breathe. Such clear walls of curved glass. Not my thigh, but my throat. And the glass shatters and the iron sunders. You notice those last two, they stayed pretty much the same because I can't think of other places where I would want to put rhetorical stresses. But you can see in the first three, I moved them actually around quite a lot by the appearance of those orange all-capped words. So rhetorical stresses can move around quite a lot, and that's a highly subjective thing. Don't freak out about it. It's just a way of thinking about language and where you want to put your pulses, particularly as you're reading your stuff aloud. Here's an example of a beautifully rhythmic poem by Edith Sodergran. Now it is fall, when all the golden birds fly home across the deep blue water. On shore I sit wrapped in its scattering glitter. Departure rustles through the trees. This farewell is vast and separation draws close, but reunion, that also is certain. My head on my arm, I fall asleep easily. On my eyes a mother's breath, from her mouth to my heart. Sleep, child, and dream, now the sun is gone. It's just lovely, slow rolling rhythms in that. It's not a metered poem, and it doesn't have rhyme, but it's still highly rhythmic, and there's lots of wonderful things to discover in that. So I'm just going to leave that up there for a second for you to look at while I sign off. Our next presentation is going to be on line breaks, which is the last of our 5 features of the line. Take a second to look at this by Edith Sodergran. Look at the different rhythms that are going on in it. There's a lot that you can learn from this little poem. Doesn't look like much, but there's a lot going on there.